So after the defeat of Simon De Montfort at the Battle of Evesham, people were ready to quickly change sides back to the Loyalists. Now, this was not extremely a big shock to a lot of people there. Many people saw Simon de Montfort as a mad, power-hungry tyrant, more so than they did as a liberator. He was more feared than he was respected, especially amongst his peers. So immediately, the garrison at Windsor and the garrison of troops at London that had pledged loyalty to Montfort surrendered to Edward I and his father, Henry III, as king. 3 days after the battle, Edward promised leniency to leading factions of Montfortians, and Berkhamsted and Wallingford also surrendered to Edward, expecting peace in return. Now, at the same time, there are many loyalists who felt that their loyalty to the king, despite all that happened to him, despite his defeat in battle, despite Edward's capture, despite Henry's capture, despite Eleanor, Edward's mother, fleeing the country to continue to build up resistance for the king outside of it, that they had the right to seize the property of those who had betrayed the king and pledged loyalty to Simon. And that's exactly what they did. In the following weeks, 1,000+ properties were seized without anybody to stop them. The Montfortians obviously were in their garrisons about, and their properties were grabbed by loyalists who would stay loyal to the king once they heard of Edward's crushing victory, and people were ready to run back to the loyalist side. Now, in mid-September, Henry III called a parliament at Winchester, and he promised peace to everybody there. Among the people there were a lot of Montfortians. However, the following morning, after he promised peace, he also declared all the properties that had been seized from the Montfortians were not going to be returned to them. Now, this, of course, angered a lot, but they didn't show their anger right on the spot, like we just said. Simon de Montfort had just had his head chopped off after being brutally killed on the battlefield, and his body mutilated, and his head was sent off as a reward. So people probably weren't too quick to say something at the moment, but this was going to be the spark that would lead to several other rebellions. Although peace was what they expected after this would drag on for 18 months of constant warfare back and forth, kind of like small guerrilla warfare type hit-and-run raids that were going to go on inside the country. After declaring that the Montfortians were not going to receive property, Henry moved to Windsor and summoned an army to go and punish London. Now, London was basically on, if there was a hit list for this, London was at the top of it. London not only had told Henry when it first pledged its loyalty to him in the first place that it needed to ask, and it gave conditions to being him. They said things along the lines of, so long as you promise to be a good king, then we'll help you. Right after that, they also supported Simon de Montfort, and when Eleanor tried to leave, the mob in London attacked her and threw stones at her. We discussed that in an earlier podcast. They attacked her when she was trying to leave. So Edward had a personal grudge with them, and Henry had a serious axe to grind with them because they basically, out of everybody, really rubbed it in his face that he was not in charge. Henry summoned the army and was marching on London. He was going to take it and punish it. And the mayor of London and 40 other townspeople gathered together and said, we don't want what happened to Simon to happen to us. So they quickly marched out to meet the king, and they begged for lenient terms. Henry agreed to be lenient, but he still had them captured and had them in prison on the spot. They obviously weren't in prison on the spot, but they were captured on the spot and bound in shackles. They were safely escorted, but they were imprisoned once he took them. After that, he marched into London and wore his crown the entire time. And usually, as far as I know, crowns were usually worn like for ceremony, for show, but the entire time he was in London, Henry was wearing it to let you know, I'm the boss, I'm back, and I'm in charge, and I'm punishing the people who have been wrong to me. Now, Simon the Younger, at this time, had fled to Kenilworth Castle. Now, if we recall earlier, he was actually supposed to meet with Simon de Montfort, his father, at Evesham and help him defeat Edward. Edward, however, had beaten Simon, both of them, in their marching pace and attacked Simon the Younger first, and he had to flee. After that, he still hoped to meet up with his father, and he didn't make it in time. Also, Edward had wisely used the banners he had captured from defeating Simon the Younger and marched within striking distance of Simon the Elder, and he basically tricked him. He used a ruse, pretending to be his son, marched up close to him within the striking distance, and he's like, okay, all right, you tricked me, but now we're going to fight. And the advantage, of course, was for Edward. Simon was defeated, but Simon the Jr., or Simon the Younger, was actually, even though he was late to reach his father before the battlefield, he arrived in time to see his father's head being paraded around on a spear in front of everybody, and they said that scarred him so bad he didn't want to eat or drink for several days after that incident. So he vowed, unlike the other Montfortians that had surrendered, he vowed to sternly resist what Edward was going to do to him. And also, he had another reason, that was that Henry had made the seizure of land official. This was no longer a debate. But Edward understood the policy of peace was now necessary. The same way he showed chivalry was not necessary in defeating Simon, now was the time to show it was. You see, disinheritance was a double-edged sword. You could threaten your subjects with it, and they would be afraid and say, okay, we'll do what you want. But also, if you disinherit somebody, much like Edward I did in the future with the famous person, Douglas, better known as the Black Douglas. We're going to discuss him later on. They have absolutely nothing to lose, so they're going to fight back against you harder. And if they already had the gall or the brass or boldness to fight you in the first place, well, now you've taken everything they have. They're nobles. They don't want to become paupers. They have nothing to lose. They're going to fight back harder. However, he promised Simon, we'll give you lenient terms if you surrender. You're still going to have to pay out large sums of money. You're going to be punished, but you're not going to get the severe punishment your father received. Simon bought it, and when he was released, or not released, but when he left Kenilworth, he actually heard about Henry making it official that all the seizure of the land was going to remain in their hands. Because, a lot of people didn't expect this to last. They said, okay, people are grabbing land. That's what happens after a war. The country's in chaos. But with Henry making it official, Simon got scared and said, well, if that's the case, maybe he'll just kill me afterwards anyway. And he winds up fleeing the country, and his younger brother, Guy, or Guy, follows suit and flees the country with him. Now, October 29th, after a long absence, Eleanor, one of my favorite queens, by the way, she's going to get her own series too, returned back to England. And she first met with Edward, her son, and that was her boy. She was proud of him. He saved the kingdom for mommy. And 2 days later, his younger brother Edmund returned as well. Now, Edmund was extremely young at the time, but didn't play a serious part in the warfare that had been going on, but he also received the biggest bonus out of it than everybody. He was given the title that Simon previously held, and he was also given all the land that had been seized from Simon De Montfort. Now, this further drove the thorn or rubbed salt in the wound of Simon the Younger, as he would be expected to inherit his father's holdings, but now they were given to Edmund. Now, a lot of people like to hate on Henry for being a foolish king, but this is a smart move on his part. Simon had been defeated. Simon the Younger had already vowed to continue fighting against him, but now he was making his son strong in his stead and had given him all his property. And now he's also making it his responsibility to go and take Kenilworth Castle. Now, Edward moved to take Kenilworth with his brother Edmund, but remember, like I said, even though they felt that this would be an easy, crushing defeat for the enemy, it didn't turn out to be that way. Because right after that, more and more people who had been disinherited, as they began to call themselves, decided, we're going to fight back. And rebellion started to spread all over the country. In April, rebels at Chesterfield and Attonwood had sprung up and began raiding the local population just, for food to survive. They had no land. They were disinherited. They couldn't go back home. Loyalists were living in their houses. So they began to raid the countryside in these two areas. And Henry of Almaine, there's a lot of Henrys around this story. Henry of Almaine, Edward's cousin and his fellow in captivity, who's basically like a brother. He grew up with them since Edward were boys, defeated the rebels at Chesterfield, and then Edward went and defeated the rebels at Alton Wood. And he actually engaged in personal combat with a man named Adam Gordon. And he was so impressed with his physical prowess and his fighting that he actually, when he defeated him, he said he would spare him and not kill him. And he would later on use him in conflict. He was indeed captured and bound. He was obviously a dangerous fighter. He went one-on-one with Edward. But it still showed Edward respected his enemies, and he was still showing mercy. A lot of people were expecting him to punish everybody the same way he had Simon earlier, but he was showing that he wasn't this brash young fool anymore. He had learned from his past mistakes, and he had grown beyond that. Now, this conflict spewed over later into the year of 1266, and Roger Leyburn, Edward's old friend, was going to help him, and he was charged with subduing the ports of Kent and Sussex. It was these ports that Simon de Montfort had used to sneak outside the country. And they used to combine land and sea assault to crush the enemy. But at the same time, Edward once again promised more lenient terms than what his father had been giving out. Now, I want to point out that earlier during this time, also, Richard of Cornwall, who had been in prison at the time, felt that the terms that Henry III was giving in the first place were too harsh and were a promise of extending warfare and not stopping it. So just keep that in mind. But at this point on, Edward and Roger begin to have success, and once again they plan to go on and take Kenilworth Castle, the last standing defense of the Montfortians. But once again, another rebellion broke out. Edward left, put down the rebellion, and finally in August went back to Kenilworth. This time a man named John de Ville had gathered together people in a place called Ely. E-L-Y. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. You guys know that. I've said that frequently in my videos. And this place had natural fortifications with which they could resist against the king's troops. Henry this time moved with his troops and led a sea assault against it. It was a small island, and it did not go well. They were repulsed with heavy losses by the enemy, and at the time, Edward had fled up north to deal with the rebellion that had been started by John Vesky. And this was actually a very swift victory for Edward. He stormed the place, smashed it, utterly wiped out the force on the inside, but once again, promised leniency to the leader. He didn't indeed capture them, but he promised leniency. And this is great credit to Edward, not only showing his military prowess, but the swiftness with which he put it down. He laid siege to the place and took it within a matter of a few days. So if you ever want to make a movie scene where they do a smash and grab siege, that usually didn't happen. Just like right now, during all this time, Kenilworth Castle is under some form of siege. Edward isn't there the entire time, Henry isn't there the entire time, but the castle's still under siege, or at least they're laying siege to it, in a way. So they want to starve that place out because of how well fortified it was. But this shows the prowess that Edward had with the swiftness with which he took his enemy and captured him. After that, he moves back down to assist his father. Now, John Deville, who I mentioned earlier, had worked together with another one of Henry's old allies, the Earl of Gloucester, who felt that it was still too cruel for them to be punishing the Montfortians the way they were. So he marched with a large portion of his army towards London. Now, this is still, to Henry, he still sees him as an ally. This is under the guise pretending to be his ally. He marches to London, which had earlier been taken back by Henry, and he tells him, we're here on the king's business, so, let us into the town. And the townspeople warned Ottobondo, who had been sent there by the Pope to make sure peace would be reinstated, to not let him inside the area. They said, don't let that guy in. We don't trust him. He ignored them, let him in, and they seized the place and let people know, this is going to be a rallying point for the Montfortians. So you could see there's this pattern in this entire warfare. They crush one rebellion, Henry punishes them severely, and they go to Kenilworth, another rebellion breaks out, leave Kenilworth, crush this rebellion, go back to Kenilworth, another rebellion breaks out. This pattern keeps going on and on and on. And there seems to be no end to it. The more and more it seems like they're going to end this warfare, it seems there's more and more ways for it to continue going on. There were also rumors that Simon's sons had raised foreign troops who were going to come back and attack England and do a full-scale invasion. So Richard of Cornwall begins to negotiate while the Tower of London is being laid siege to. He begins to negotiate with the Earl of Gloucester and John, and saying, guys, listen, we can finally bring peace to this. This war doesn't need to continue to go on. We can convince the king to give you more peaceful terms, and you guys don't have to continue, fighting vehemently. And this endless warfare can stop. Now, at the time, on the outside, however, Henry was ready to put his foot down. Finally, when Edward rejoins him, Kenilworth Castle, after 6 months of siege and starvation about to set in, they finally surrendered before the time of Christmas comes. They finally surrendered and give up. Now, all that's left was London, and Henry is ready to lay his foot on London and severely punish it. He doesn't want to show anybody inside. Eleanor goes to Port Dover. Henry of Almaine is sent overseas to gather foreign troops and mercenaries. Edward comes with an army. Henry comes with an army. Levies are raised. Siege equipment is sent in. They're ready to crush it and stomp everybody inside of London into the ground. But the end is anticlimactic. If this was a movie, this would be like everybody gets together ready for this massive fight, and it doesn't happen. Richard of Cornwall on the inside, and the man the Pope would send over, I can't pronounce his name. I'm going to put it down here for you guys to read it. I don't want to, butcher it. I'll just call him Otto for now. Finally was able to make peace with everybody inside, and there's no fight. Now, they added amendments to what Henry had earlier said at Winchester. First, the disinherited would not be disinherited forever. They removed that clause from his dictum earlier at Winchester. The second thing they did was Henry felt he would show mercy. He said, okay, I'll tell you what, you can have your lands back, but you're not allowed to have them until the debt I put on them is paid off. So royalists get to live there while you live nowhere. So it's really no other choice in the Montfortians' mind but to keep on fighting. So what they negotiate, what Richard of Cornwall negotiates with them, is that he gets to the point where Henry will let them keep their lands. They can live on them. They'll have to pay the heavy taxes. They'll have to pay the heavy fines as punishment, but they get to live on their own land. Somebody else will be living there. And this finally is a ceasefire. At the Siege of London, like I said, they built up this massive, for this massive fight, but there is no fight. All that's left now are the rebels at Ely, E-L-Y, like I said. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. And the following month, Edward goes there and he destroys them. He puts an end to them. So finally, after 18 months of this civil conflict that went on after the Battle of Evesham, it's finally put to peace. So the important points to take from this are, one, Henry, the reason the conflict kept going on is because Henry's first punishment that he gave to them they felt it was too severe. And he basically put the enemy in a position where they had no choice but to fight him. Otherwise, they would lose everything they had. You know, no land, nowhere to live. It would just be nothing. And then his first form of mercy, which would be, okay, you can have your land back once the heavy fines are paid off of them. Well, the fines can take years to pay, so in the meantime, they have nowhere to live. And we also see Edward's growth in this. Gets to go on some serious adventures. He engages in personal combat with an enemy. He has quite a few sieges. He has sea and land assaults. His father himself even gets into the military action as well. Even though Henry is known as, they say, the pious king who didn't fight, he was involved heavily in the conflict, and his brother Edmund came out of it very well. So at long last, for 18 months, peace is there within England. Eleanor is back as queen. Edmund is the new earl that Simon de Montfort was. Oh, also another thing to note, that another Eleanor, like I said, there's a lot of them. Simon's wife, Henry's sister, was sent into permanent exile for her assistance with Simon the Rebellion. Alright folks, thanks for watching. I know this video was a bit longer than the ones I've been putting out lately, but I wanted to kind of get all this in here as fast as I could. I spoke very fast in this video. I hope I didn't speak too fast for anybody who was watching. I hope everybody understand what I said. Next time, we're going to discuss some more about Edward II. We're going to chop it up into the series. We're going to keep this going. This is basically our first crossover of Medieval Mondays meets our Edward I podcast, the Iron Plantagent. So next time, we're going to follow Edward as he prepares to go on his crusade into the Holy Land that his father promised to go on but wasn't able to. We're also, in the future, going to be looking at some more of Henry II. We're going to be going back. This time we're going to be going to Ireland. And we're going to visit Wales again. For all you people out there, I know a lot of people loved that I covered the Welsh warriors. We're going to go more in-depth on them. We're going to look at Strattonborough, some interesting characters like Strattonborough in Ireland. A lot of Irish kings. It was just, a whole lot to go on. We got a lot more coming for you guys. Thanks for watching. See you.